Hey, Engineering Gals, it's your host, Amy Carr. Welcome to the Engineering Gals Chat series. Today, I am so excited to be bringing us some of the most phenomenal Asian women to talk about their experiences as Asians in STEM. And we're going to be talking about the racial discrimination that the Asian community is facing since last year, stemming from the social stigma associated with COVID-19, and as well as how the STEM community can be better allies. So this event is hosted by Engineering Gals. Engineering Gals was founded in 2016. We're an online community of engineers, and our mission is to inspire the next generation of engineers by providing information and resources. And just a quick reminder, this event is not sponsored by any government corporation or entity. It's an independent event hosted by Engineering Gals. So let's go ahead and roll right into introductions. I'll quickly introduce myself. My background is in civil engineering, and I've been working in the water industry for about 7 years now. And I'm also one of the co-founders of Engineering Gals. And I'm really excited to be here today and to talk to all of our amazing panelists. So let's go ahead and start with our introductions. Next up, we have Mary. Mary, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, it's Mary. I'm a second generation Vietnamese immigrant, first generation graduate. I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree. I started off my career as a structural engineer at NASA, and I'm currently an engineer for missile defense.
Thank you so much, Mary. I'm so excited that you joined us today and you're part of the panel. Let's go ahead and go with Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa, also known as It's Vanessa on Instagram. I am Filipino-American, first generation. My parents came to America about 30 years ago, so I'm still the first one to really experience the American dream out of my family. And I am a civil engineer. I originally started my career in land development and then transferred over to transportation engineering about 2.5 years ago. And I'm happy to be here at this panel.
Oh, thanks, Vanessa. So next up, we have Elaine. Elaine, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I would love to introduce myself. So I'm Elaine. I'm currently a university student at the University of British Columbia. I'm doing a combined degree in commerce and computer science, and I'm currently doing my second software engineering internship in mobile development. And in terms of my background, I am a second generation Chinese immigrant, and I'm Chinese Canadian. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Next, we have Naomi. Naomi, please introduce yourself.
Hello. So I'm based in Australia, so I'd like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I want to pay my respects to the first scientists of this land, and obviously pay my respects to all elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Naomi Kobelik, technically Dr. Naomi Kobelik. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a second generation Australian, first generation university graduate, and first generation doctor. So I'm a scientist and science communicator. I do a bunch of stem cell stuff, and I've had TV shows. Yeah, it's me.
That's so cool. Thanks so much, Naomi. Next up, we have Marianne. Marianne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Marian Gonzalez, and I'm a Filipino-American and daughter to immigrant parents. I earned my bachelor's at Cal State University Long Beach in chemical engineering, and my master's at University of Southern California, also in chemical engineering. And right now I'm working as an engineer at NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, and some of the things I got to work on include the Mars rover and instruments for the International Space Station.
Thanks so much, Marianne. So let's go ahead and talk about definition. So when we talk about Asians, it's a large group, a very diverse community of people. So what do we mean when we're talking about, who do we define as Asians? Not just Asian Americans, but the entire diaspora. So when I was looking online, I'm trying to figure out, okay, like, who are we talking about? And what I found was it's people having origins in any of the original people of the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about who do we personally, as the panelists, identify as. So I could go first. For me, I identify myself as a Sikh. My family is from a region in India called Punjab. I was actually born in India and moved to the US when I was just a few months old. So I am first generation American and now Canadian since I recently moved to Canada. Mary, would you like to share as well?
Yeah, so when people ask me about my nationality, I always say that I'm Vietnamese. Even though I am Vietnamese American, I have European roots, and it's because the Vietnam War, my dad's dad, so my real grandpa, was an American soldier, and we don't know where he is or who he is, as far as like me and my dad. And then my mom's dad's dad, so my grandfather, was French, but we don't know him either. So it's kind of interesting that both of my parents have, their dad or their grandfather coming from other countries, but then kind of like losing them along the way. And then my parents immigrated to the US states in the 90s. And kind of just started fresh, not knowing English, but they were able to come over here because of the Vietnam War. The US government was helping Vietnam families that, that had relations or family members from America. And so that's how my parents were able to come over here. But so, yeah, I identify myself as Vietnamese. And I think it's important that we talk about how like culturally diverse Asia is. Like when people think of Asia, they immediately think of like East Asia, which is like China as the biggest, or Southeast Asia, which is like, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, or Indonesia. I hope I have my countries right. I don't know. But like South Asia for me always gets excluded, like India. And we need to start talking about like how big Asia is. There's like over 40 countries in Asia, right? So it's kind of hard to just clump all of us into Asia. Like we're Asians in STEM, but there's so many different Asians. So I think it's cool that we're talking about it. And because even though we're all Asian, we have such like unique backgrounds and traditions and culture and upbringings. So yeah, I think it's important that we hit on those and that we're able to diversify our panel and each talk about our experiences.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's a really important thing that you brought up is how diverse the Asian community really is within itself. So it's really cool that we're all coming from different backgrounds within the Asian community to talk about our experiences. So let's go ahead and go with Marianne.
So I identify as Filipino American, but I do have a bit of some Spanish and Chinese roots. And my last name is Gonzalez, which confuses people quite often, but it comes from when Spain colonized the Philippines. So if you know a lot of Filipinos, you'll notice that a lot of them have Spanish last names. And what's funny is that most of the time, though, people assume I'm just Chinese. So when they see my last name and they see how I look, they're really confused. So, but most of my family actually lives in the Philippines. Only some of them immigrated to the US. So I barely get to see them at all, but I still identify as Filipino American. My parents moved to the US in their late 20s in the late 1970s, and then they had my brother and I later on, and that makes me second generation American.
Thank you, Marianne. What about you, Elaine?
Yeah, I really love what Mary said about how there's so many different types of Asians, and specifically when people talk about China as a country, for example, as I identify as Chinese, there are actually more than 50 different ethnic minorities within China, which no one seems to know about. So even if you say that you're Chinese, that can mean so many differences in, cultural backgrounds and traditions and things like that. So I really love that you brought that up. In terms of my cultural upbringing, my parents were first generation immigrants. My dad moved to Canada when he was around 16 years old, and his family actually had a small cafe, and they were one of the first Asian families in a predominantly white small town at the time. So I'm really proud of my background, and I'm really happy to be able to share the differences and the diversity even within each Asian country. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. Um, how about you, Vanessa?
So I'm also Filipino American, like Marianne, and people also get very confused when they first meet me because they literally guess every ethnicity of what I am, and even the Filipinos can never seem to get it right because I don't seem to look like the typical Filipino. And it's not until like they try to until they hear my last name as well, they're like, oh, okay, I guess you are Filipino. But it's really interesting the fact that like since the Spanish took over the Philippines for hundreds of years, so we have a lot of similarities in our culture. And then America took over after the Spanish Philippine War. I don't remember the years, so don't quote me on that. But that is why actually in America, in the Philippines, a lot of them are able to speak English, and a lot of our language is Spanish. So a little background on that, but yeah, definitely I agree also with Mary. We're so diverse, and similar to what Elaine said, for China in the Philippines, we are thousands of islands, and so somebody from the mainland of the Philippines will speak a different dialect from somebody else in a different part of the Philippines. So I find it really interesting to, connect with different Filipinos, because one Filipino will speak Tagalog and another Filipino will speak like a completely different language that I won't be able to understand or my parents won't understand. So yeah, I definitely feel like it's great to have these conversations of our cultures and our ethnicities and our backgrounds. And so really thankful to have this group to talk about
I
this
know,
topic.
I'm so excited to talk to all my Asian sisters. So Naomi, would you like to share next?
Yeah, I think I just want to touch on what we're just talking about. It's so interesting when we talk about Asians, because I don't think you can find Asians from Asia that would self-identify as being Asian. It's really from a Western gaze that we look at Asians. Does that make sense? So I think it's really interesting when you look at all of us, where we come from such different Asian countries, we live in such different Westernized countries, but I think because we're all part of the diaspora, we have these shared lived experiences that we're able to connect on. And I think it's really important that we really put effort into finding our community, because I think that's where you find the best support. So I think I best describe how I identify when I was a kid. So I was about 4 years old, and this old white couple in a restaurant was like, "Where are you from?" So I told them, I was like, I'm half Singaporean, I'm half Croatian, and I'm a whole Australian. And they started laughing, telling me that that adds up to 2. And I cried. I cried for ages. But that's pretty much how I identify. I'm half Singaporean, I'm half Croatian, and I'm a whole Australian.
I love that. I mean, at the end of the day, we have our Asian backgrounds, but depending on where we grew up or were born, that is a huge part of who we are today too. Whether you're, Australian, Canadian, or American as well. So I think that's a really cool I think that's a very smart way for you to describe your identity at such a young age.
Yeah. It's so funny because I think I really stuck to that when I was younger, and the older I got, I was like, why is everyone telling me this is wrong? And I've just looped back around, and I was like, no, 4-year-old Naomi was right. It's exactly what I am.
For sure, man. So, okay, so we talked about definitions, and let's go ahead and go into our first topic, which is identity. So, what are some of the things that you associate with your Asian identity? What are your thoughts on that, Marianne?
So I heavily associate any culture with food because food is like a universal thing that everyone understands, everyone's got to eat. So if I'm visiting the Philippines or any other country outside of my home country, I really try to indulge in the food and kind of talk to the locals and ask them, what should I try? And I greatly appreciate it because based on a culture's food, you could tell a lot from about the history of a specific culture, and I think it's so powerful. And it can provide a lot of backstories to a culture's history as well. And besides food, I think another important thing, of course, is the language. So personally, I don't know any Filipino language, so I believe that my parents came to the US and they wanted me to assimilate into the American lifestyle. So I wasn't taught any Tagalog, which is the most common Filipino language. So I kind of wish I knew that, but so when I would go to family parties or other gatherings of other Filipinos, and I would be out of the loop because I wouldn't know what's going on and I hear the language. So that is, I feel like, is so important. So if I were in my parents' place, I would have just taught myself Tagalog. So I feel like culture, a thing to identify with definitely is the language. So.
Our language and the food. I think that's such a rich part of our culture and how we grow up. What about you, Elaine?
Yeah, so a little bit different from Marianne. I really associate my Asian identity with familial values and, the concept of unwavering loyalty, especially to those with similar backgrounds. I think growing up in a Western society, it's very much focused on the individual and how we can benefit ourselves rather than the community as a whole. And especially with this year, I've really seen the stark contrast between this Western ideal versus the culture that I was brought up in. And although Asian families are known for tough love, I just think the sense of community and rallying together to support those in your own community is just second to none. So that's what I associate with being Asian.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we talked a little bit about our identity, but have any of you had to navigate the topic of authenticity as it relates to your Asian identity? And if so, what is that experience? Let's go ahead and start with Vanessa.
So yeah, when it comes to authenticity, when it comes to my Asian background, I think it's something that I had to learn to grow into, honestly. Because where I grew up, I was one of the few Asians actually in my school, so it was pretty obvious, like, who's the Asian? Like, there was 3 or 4 of us in like my class, and so kind of similar to what Marianne brought up with food. I would bring Filipino food because my mom loved to cook, what we call baon, which is like lunch for school. And so my mom would cook food for me for lunch, and it was sometimes difficult because some people would be like, "Oh, what's that smell?" Because I know some people don't like fish, but my mom loved cooking fish, or some of the Filipino food kind of looks a little weird, but it tastes delicious. And so it was kind of hard, kind of figuring out where I belonged. And also relating to that question too was what box do I check when it comes to who am I? Because we are saying Asians in STEM, but for Filipinos, some associate ourselves with Pacific Islanders. And I don't know, for the longest time, I didn't know which box to check. I would go in between. I would check both if I could check both, or I think sometimes they do include Filipino, but honestly, just trying to find who I am was very difficult. But it wasn't until I think the end of high school or after high school, I started meeting more Filipinos, and that's where I really got to like understand a little bit more about my Filipino culture and finding exactly who I am.
Yeah. Has anybody else had that similar experience about like not knowing what box to check?
Yeah, I've told this stories like so many times, but I was in like, I want to say like second or third grade, and we had like those standardized testing, and I was always like confused on like which race box to check. I don't know why. Like, I want to go back in time just to see like what all my options were, because I don't understand now why I was so confused. Like, I remember asking my teacher, I was like, hey, which one am I? And she was like, oh, you're Hispanic. And I was like, okay, yeah, I am. And I checked the Hispanic box, and I remembered one time checking the Caucasian box because there was Asian in it, and I was like, I must be Caucasian. Like, I really want to go back in time. Like, it's a weird challenge as like a little like elementary schooler. And I remembered like everyone would always mispronounce my last name, and it's Wing, right? If you pronounce it in Vietnamese, it's Wing. But for some reason, like in America, people pronounce it Nugent, and they pronounced it Nugent so much that Vietnamese people started pronouncing it Nugent. And I'm like, bro, your last name is not Nugent. Like, stop saying that. So then I just started pronouncing it as Win, because it's like the easiest way for like non-Viet people to pronounce it. But then they'd be like, how did you just like drop all the letters in your last name and like pronounce it as Win? Like, I don't know, dude.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that because my last name it's pronounced Gaur, like Gaur, and I say it's Car. I like whitewash my last name. So people are like, oh, like C-A-R. I'm like, no, bitch, it's K-A-U-R. Like the princess, because Car actually means princess in our language. So I don't know. I totally get what you mean.
I think the point on whitewashing is important because like everything that we embody is so different from Western culture that we subconsciously or even purposely whitewash ourselves so that it's like easier for people to comprehend and or accept, right? Like I feel like we kind of like minimize ourselves in a way that makes people around us like more comfortable with us and who we are and our culture. Like, I don't know, like even with food, like the whole point of like bringing your culture's lunch to food. I mean, bringing your culture's food to lunch. It's like people would look at it so weird and it would make you feel so awkward and like no one would want to like sit with you, or like people would ask you way too many questions about it. So you just like start doing things that would, you know, like so that you would not like put yourself in those circumstances, right?
It's about making them more comfortable. And I feel like because like we're parents of immigrants, there was a real expectation of assimilation. Yeah. So it's just, you just kind of do what you think is going to make people feel more comfortable.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's interesting though. I think my lived experience is a little bit different. Like I mentioned before, I'm half Singaporean, half Croatian, but I'm born and raised in Australia. I lived in a rural school and I was the only Asian there. So I had long black hair and they used to pass me around just to like pat my hair. And I thought it was really cool at the time because I thought like all the kids liked me and I was popular. But they were like, literally, they would just carry me around and like pat my head and talk about how silky and soft my hair was. But I think it's interesting. Sorry if you can hear the construction, but I think that particular experience made me think that being Asian was better than being white. So like I would go to school and I would look down on all of these people with bland palates eating their ham and tomato bread sandwiches. I was like, don't know what flavor is. But it's interesting because I think because I was the only one, I wasn't singled out or bullied. I was kind of treated like the interesting pet is honestly what I was treated like. But I thought I was like, better than all of you.
Dude, I got bullied so much in school. And I think it's also because like I live in the South and I was practically raised in the South. And it's like majority of the population is white people and then the rest are black people and then like Asian people. Like where I am now, it's like less than 3% Asian. So I felt like I always stood out, and because of that, I felt like I never like fit in anywhere. Like I felt like the Asian community that did exist here were also like whitewashed to fit in. And then I always felt like I was like the odd one out. And then like my hair, dude, I went through a phase where I just like wanted to like lighten it and bleach it. I was like, if I had lighter hair, if I looked more white, if I dressed more white, like I just went through all these different phases where I would like change myself constantly to like fit in with people. And I was at some point, and it wasn't even until like my late 20s that I started being like, bro, this is so basic. Like being Asian is so cool. And it took me so long to realize how cool being Asian is. And like, I have to like say it out loud now because I spent my whole entire life just like not seeing or feeling that. So now I'm just like, bro, our food is bomb. Our traditions are lit. Our parties are lit. Like, who sings karaoke like Asian people do? Nobody. You know what I mean? So it's like our parties are awesome. Our food is tasty, umami, AF. Like, so yeah, that's all I have to say about that before I keep going off.
Like having that Asian pride is something that like I mentioned that I always had, but it'd be so confusing because I also was a Singaporean citizen and lived in Singapore for a while, and I'd always go back and see my family. And I got so confused that in Australia, I'd be told I was Asian. And then I'd go to Singapore and they'd call me white. Like,
oh my God.
It drives me up the wall. I was like, so what am I? Like, I can't be either of them anywhere. Like, even like this year, my mom said to me, she was like, but you're not Asian. And I was like,
dude, half-seas have like the biggest identity crisis ever because it's like to the Vietnamese community, like if I run into like any Vietnamese person, the first thing that they point out is that they're like, oh, you're white, like you're obviously mixed with white. And I'm like, okay, thank you, but to white people I'm Asian, you know what I mean? Like so it's like I feel like I'm never like either or, because to both sides, I'm like the opposite of whatever they are, you know?
You're constantly told you're an outsider. That's exactly it. But I think there's also something really wonderful in terms of that.
I'm not mixed, but I get that a lot because even my husband, he's like, oh, you don't have Filipino features, and like they like literally think like, oh, you must be mixed. They like say you're mestiza because I literally get called all different types of Asians, like I mentioned before. It's kind of annoying. It's like they think that you're never enough of one or the other, right? Of like being
off because they think that they know who you are more than you know who you are. Like I feel like it's like, how do people have the audacity to tell you who you are?
Truly.
Yeah. So I grew up in this small town called Bakersfield, California, and there was a lot of Mexicans in our community, and I just remember growing up and people would come up to me and be like, start speaking Spanish, or they would just automatically assume that I was Mexican. And I'm not gonna lie, for a while I just went with it. I was like, okay, because there weren't that many other Indians in that town as there are now. So I didn't really grow up with a large like Indian population. There weren't that many Asians there. So I also never knew which box to tick. For me, all I knew, I was Indian, and like I was born in India. So like I would go and check the native Indian box when I was younger. And I was like, yeah, like I'm native Indian because I'm, from India. And my dad was like, no, honey, you're Asian. Like, we are Asian. Say it with me. And I'm like, what is Asian? Like, what is that? Like, I don't get it. And I'm like, okay, if you say so. So then I started checking Asian. But like he had to tell me. There's no way I would have known myself. So it's crazy how there's like this identity crisis that everybody does experience if you've like migrated, or if your family is from like, a different background. So yeah. So
now adults, people our age now don't know that like India is Asian.
I know, dude, it's crazy. Growing up, like I didn't actually think that I was Asian. So like when people think about like the Asian like stereotype, it's like, oh, you're really, really smart, or like, you know, like the whole model minority thing, mindset. But I was always just like, yeah, I that's not me. I'm not that smart. But like it's crazy. And like people always thought I was Mexican too. So or you'd get that term of like you're exotic. But I've also had people tell me that, oh, you know, question kind of like, you know, are your parents really Indian? Oh, there's no way, because like your parents must be like half white, or your grandparents. And I'm like, no, all the family that I know, my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents, they're all from India, and we're all Indian. So it's like, I think it's kind of rude for people to kind of say that, oh, you look like this because you must have some sort of Caucasian roots, saying that only Caucasian people have like um good looks. So they'd be like, oh, you're really pretty for an Indian girl, or like you're exotic, and like, oh my god, I hate that word. But that was also something that like was really annoying for sure.
Can I add on a very small rant? I know we're going way over time with these questions, but like it's so funny. Like being mixed race, whenever I hang out with my different Asian friends' families, they always compliment me on being mixed race. They're like, you're so beautiful because you're half white. You're so exotic. We love mixed race babies. And it's so stressful because I'm like, God, we really need to stop putting Western beauty standards on a pedestal and saying that I'm attractive because I'm a white version of you. Do you know what I mean? I was like,
Yes.
but there's also like the respect where I can't go and tell my friend's mom that she's like wrong. Do you know what I mean? I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh no, how do I navigate this?
Okay.
Dude, my mom bleaches her skin. I don't want to put my mom on the spot, but like growing up, like the standard was like listening to my mom, the standard of beauty was you had to be skinny, you had to keep your long black hair, and you had to have light skin. Like when I would tan, she would be like, oh my God, what is that? And I'm like, bro, I'm Asian. If I go out into the sun, I get 3 shades darker. Like, what do you mean? It was so weird.
Yeah, I think that's something that even like the entire Asian continent, and you'll also see that in like the Middle East too, where lighter skin is preferred over, you know, deeper skin tones, and like the colorism is there, and that's like a whole nother conversation to be had. But yeah, I definitely get what you're saying about that. So
Yeah.
so I was gonna
Go ahead.
ask, what are some things you do now that help you connect with your Asian heritage, Marianne?
Yeah, so I could talk about in the past what I did and what I do up to now. So when I was in college, there were all the student organizations, and some of them were cultural, and I ended up joining the Filipino Cultural Organization. And something that helped me connect with my culture was a performance. And every year they held a performance called Filipino Cultural Night. And you actually perform skits and you do dances revolved around the experience of being Filipino American. And I feel like that was like really powerful to work with other students and come up with a story of what our life is like, and then also sprinkle in some traditional Filipino dances in there too. So I feel like that was such a fun way to do it and to meet people from my background as well. And I feel like everyone should do it when they're in college. Um, and up to now, another way I like to connect with my culture is trying to stay updated with kind of current events going on in the Philippines and talking to my family there more. Now that we have, a lot of my family has adapted to using like Facebook and communicating with people, other family members and across the world. So I feel like it's been easier to like talk with them and understand what's going on over there, and also try to teach myself just how to cook some Filipino food, because like I said before, food is a great way to understand my culture. So I enjoy like trying to learn to do it, and Yeah.
Thanks, Marianne. How about you, Vanessa?
Kind of similar to Marianne. I also got involved in Filipino American cultural groups. I got involved in one actually when I was in high school, like junior or senior year. And I really got to learn a little bit more about what's going on in the Philippines, and just kind of meet more Filipinos because, like I said, like growing up, I didn't really know too many Filipinos. I tried to join one actually in college as well, but I think by the time I transferred over to a university, I was a little bit older, so I couldn't really relate to the early college life for the Filipino Americans. But yeah, I definitely felt that I had to get involved in organizations to really meet more Filipinos and be able to get connected to my culture. Because a lot of my cousins, a lot of us, our first generation grew up in America, so we are fairly Americanized, which is kind of unfortunate because, similar to what Marianne mentioned, my parents also didn't really speak much Tagalog to me. I kind of taught myself a little bit, so I slightly understand. But again, I think they were trying to assimilate because my dad has a very thick accent, and so he's, I think, sometimes embarrassed and didn't want me to have to go to ESL or anything like that, because I think that's what some people also had to go through, of not having English as their first language. And so that's mainly why my parents didn't teach me Tagalog as like what they wanted to, or that they didn't really want me to learn that because they thought I would be discriminated against. So trying to get more cultured, but trying to understand, like, by talking to my parents a little bit more of what they've been through and trying to know more while they're still around.
Oh, that's nice. How about you, Mary?
So my upbringing was a little bit different. Vietnamese was my first language, and I started school not knowing English. Like, my parents put me in preschool at the age of 4, kindergarten by 5, and I remembered like walking into school and not understanding anything like my teachers or students or the students were saying, and they would have to like act out their words, and I can't even remember like how I learned English so fast, but I learned it so fast that like I remembered like the lunch ladies and like other teachers would ask me like, oh my God, like how come you don't have an Asian accent? Because I was like, you know, obviously Asian. Like I had like the very short like bob haircut with the bangs. Like I was Asian, you know? And on top of that, my mom really bans me from speaking English in the house, even after I learned English via school, because she didn't want me to lose my Vietnamese language. And she was like really harsh about it. And I was really like, I started to become really resentful towards her for it, because I'm the oldest and I have 3 younger siblings, and my parents did not impose that on my younger siblings at all. Like they did not care if my younger siblings spoke English in the house. But for me, like I had to watch like these like not DVDs, like I don't like those old like tape players that were like literally hooked on phonics, but for Vietnamese kids, like all day, every single day. Like my mom was like, you're going to know Vietnamese and you're never going to forget Vietnamese. But I really appreciate her for doing that, because now, like, since I've left the nest, which was at a very young age, like my parents left at 17. I stayed in Alabama. My parents moved to South Carolina when I was 17, and I decided to stay to pursue my education. And since them being away, like I've lost so much of it. Like I can't speak it as well. And I used to be able to read and write. I can't speak it as well, but I can, when people talk to me in Vietnamese, I can understand it and process it like perfectly, but it's really hard for me to like speak back. So for me, like it's hard for me because like I'm not around like a lot of family or Vietnamese people here. So it's hard for me to like keep that like Vietnamese communication. So something I've been doing recently is like my For You page is like getting more and more populated with Vietnamese people. And I just like watch them like cook and talk through their recipes in Vietnamese, or they'll make funny videos and it's in all Vietnamese. Like I'm on like Vietnamese TikTok right now and I love it so much because like I completely understand it. But like it's when I listen to it, I'm like, oh, like this is so easy for me. Like I feel like I lose it when I'm talking to my parents, but as soon as I'm like in the dialogue or in the dialect again consistently, I'm like, oh, I can like pick this up back quickly, you know? And another thing is like my mom cooked so much for us growing up. Like she loved to cook for us. And every time I go visit her now, she makes us like a feast, like every single day. But the one thing that she never did was like teach me any of like her recipes or her food. Like she never taught me how to like cook Vietnamese food. Like I taught myself how to cook like American food and I like to cook. But she never taught me her recipes because she just loved doing it for us. And so like an initiative that I do now is like for the holidays, like I'll make it a point to cook at least like one of my mom's meals, like figure out the recipe and how to make it and try to incorporate more Vietnamese dishes into like, you know, like American holidays and traditions. And with my friends too, because like I really appreciate when my friends are like interested in trying like, you know, dishes and food like from my culture. And so yeah, those are like a couple of things that I do currently to just try to like embrace, you know, where I'm from.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me too, I didn't really, my first language was Punjabi. So when I went to school, I just learned it there. And then at home, my parents didn't speak English. So I didn't really have a choice until my sisters got older. And then amongst us, we started speaking English. So we lost it growing up. I used to like have an accent growing up too. I still feel like I still have one, but that's just a part of like, you know, having a different first language and then, you know, learning English as you go. So yeah, definitely. And then I also finally learned how to read Punjabi like this year. Yeah. So this year for the first time I can read Punjabi and I'm super slow, but that's like one way that I've tried to connect with my heritage. It's like, okay,
That's really cool.
I want to know how to read it. Yeah. Thanks. So, so let's talk about, you know, life as an Asian woman. So what is it like to be Asian and how has your experience or perspective changed over the course of your life? Vanessa?
So I feel like this is a hard question because I've always known that I was Asian. But I think it's something that, you know, like I mentioned earlier, it's something that I had to get accustomed to of being surrounded by others who weren't Asian and also embracing being Filipino and meeting others, because in our industry, at least, I feel like I'm one of the few, at least in civil engineering. I've met other male civil engineers that are Filipino, but I still don't know too many Filipina engineers. And so this is something I'm still embracing and something that I'm still trying to hope to promote more of Filipinos. And let's see, I'm trying to like look at my notes, so sorry if I keep looking down. I mentioned in my notes that colorism, like we mentioned earlier, is something that I also had a hard time with, because as a Filipino, like I would also get really dark easily, and my mom would always say like, oh, you're getting so dark, and complain how dark I was getting, and she would give me like papaya soap or something to lighten up my skin. Or another thing is like how Naomi mentioned of white features. Basically, they're like, oh, you know, your nose looks so like not flat like a typical Filipino, or like just multiple things that were just not okay. Like colorism was not okay as like, and I think Amy has mentioned that a lot of our cultures had this, and I kind of like resented that, hearing like, oh, you don't look like you should be having like this color, or you need to look a certain way. And that's something that I really wanted to embrace, that I'm okay with being who I am, my Asian features. I I think there was a point in time when I would see like the fashion and models, like they would do like this, and that would get me so upset. Like when they're trying to look Asian, those are things that like I like my Asian features, but I don't think it's okay when people make fun of it or try to be it. So that's something that like I definitely struggled with as like being Asian. And when it comes to privilege as well, like being Asian, like I mentioned, having some features that looked more European, a lot of my relatives would be like, oh, you are mestiza, you should be like an actress in the Philippines or something like that, because I didn't look dark. I didn't have like certain features that weren't necessarily like beautiful. So I think that's something that like wasn't fair. Like I thought it was a compliment, but also at the same time, I thought it wasn't fair to the original Filipinos who have more features. They should be the ones who are on the TVs in the Philippines or like representing America. And even I think like there was Miss Philippines who won like Miss Universe, like both of them had like some more white features, and that's something that I think it's like, well, they don't look like the original Filipinos, which I mean they're beautiful, but at the same time it's like that shouldn't be what defines beauty, at least in the Philippines as our culture. So as an Asian woman, like I like my features, but I also wish it, like kind of what Naomi mentioned earlier, that it wasn't the European features that should be pronounced or like that are beautiful. So those are some things that really bothered me, and I wish we could change that and be okay with our own Asian features as an Asian woman and not be made fun of for any of that. So going off on a little bit of a tangent, but those were the notes that I had.
Perfect. How about you, Naomi?
Sorry about the dramatic hair. It's like 40 degrees and I'm sweating bullets. So I'm going to turn the fan on whenever I'm not talking and have my dramatic hair going back. But what I wanted to say about maybe my perspective changing over time, like I've spoken about how I was younger and I was like, I'm Asian, my food's better than yours, you'll have no palates. And then I'd spend more time in Singapore and I'd be like, oh, maybe I am white. And the older I got, I started to get more confused. And now I'm very confident with my identity. But the older I get, the more Western I look. So I think it has a lot to do with the fact that my jaw started changing when I got braces. In the last maybe 3 to 4 years, I started bleaching my hair. Prior to that, I never touched my hair. It was long, it was natural, untouched, because that was the Asian beauty standards that I was adhering to. And only in the last few years have people said to me, oh, I didn't realize you were Asian, or oh, you're not really Asian, and shit like that, which is really offensive. So I think it's just, the more westernized I think I tend to look, which just happens to be me embracing coloring my hair, wearing as much makeup as I want, you know, spending hours laying in the sun because it's summer and I look cute with a tan. I think I experience a lot more white privilege from that as well. And it's interesting trying to navigate that, but it's taken me a long time to come to the stage I'm at now, where I really don't give a shit what anyone thinks about my identity. I know who I am, and that's that. Like, I'm not gonna go into petty arguments or try and defend how Asian I am or anything like that.
I love that. How about you, Mary?
I think the hardest part for me growing up Asian, and not even just like growing up, I feel like just being like in Western culture, period, is like, I feel like we're constantly like trying to find a happy medium, right? Like growing up, I had all of these like Asian standards that my parents wanted me to have. But then I was, I grew up in a culture where these standards were completely different from theirs. And all of my friends were doing completely different things. And as a child or as a teen, you want to be socially acceptable and you want to fit in with your friends and you want to be cool like the rest of your friends. But your parents and your family are telling you that what they think is cool and is acceptable within their community is completely different. And I think it's so hard, like being an Asian American, you're constantly battling with the two. And especially like being like sliced down in the middle where you're like both, it's like, who am I? Like, which one am I? Who do I want to be? And you grow up with two totally different worlds and culture constantly telling you who you should be, that you kind of like just either conform to one or the other, right? But us living in America, or I'm living in America, living in Western culture, you just naturally conform to what you see more on a daily basis, right? So that's, to me, where like whitewashing comes from. Just doing things to yourself and acting in certain ways, and the beauty standards and the fashion, you're almost like, I was almost like trying to like ditch my Asian culture to an extent, because I felt like it was just like too much for people. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to wear Asian clothing. Like, I didn't want to have hair or any like features that made me look more Asian, because the more Asian I was to me growing up, like the more like off and out of place I was to everyone else around me. So it's always been a tough balance. But I mean, it's like I said before, it wasn't until like my 20s when I was just like, dude, like, forget that. Like, that is just too much work. Like, it's literally too much work to just figure out like what everybody wants, what everybody thinks is cool, what is beauty. Like, I just started doing like what makes me feel happy. You know, like I had long bleach hair for so long because I thought that's what was cute. And then it wasn't even until this year where I was just like, no, I'm going to go back black hair, like my natural hair color. I want it short. Like, I just started doing things that made me feel good. And like, I don't know, I feel like when I started doing things that make me feel good, I feel like other people notice it, because I'm just naturally like more happy and more vibrant. And people are like, oh my God, what are you doing? I want to do what you're doing. Like, what are you wearing? Like, how do you do your hair? And I'm like, wow, this is how it is to just be comfortable in your own skin. You know what I mean? But you don't realize that until you're just doing it, because up until then, I was just doing what everybody else is doing. But yeah.
I think it sounds like you're carving out your own space. And I think that's really important, because you're never going to appease everyone. It's about like feeling comfortable with what you want to do yourself. But I'm still at like in this odd space where it's like, I bloody love my pink hair. I look really cute with it. I love having pink eyeshadow. I think I'm goddamn adorable. But it is really hard having people not recognize that I'm Asian. And that's like me and my friend who does my hair, who's also half Asian. We're working towards how many fun styles we can get in before I go back to natural hair, because I really, really struggle with people denying my identity. And I do miss my natural hair. But I've spent too much money on this stuff. It's going to stay pink for a long while.
But Naomi, that is not your fault. That is literally not your problem.
Yeah.
Like, people not accepting that you're Asian and look different, or whatever the typical Asian that they're used to, that is literally not your problem. Like,
True.
you literally are Asian because you're Asian. Like, you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to look a certain way. You're Asian because you're Asian. However you look is however you look. And however people perceive it, that's their perception. Sorry that it's like such in a box. I don't know.
I know what you mean.
And you look great in pink hair.
I do.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. For me, my growing up, it was interesting because I came to the US when I was just like maybe 3 months old, but growing up, seeing like TV, mainstream media, Hollywood movies, even everyone is just that's casted is usually white. If you look back, I go back and watch the 90s movies and I'm like, that is why I was so brainwashed to think that this was the standard of beauty. It's because that's all I saw on mainstream media. And so, for me personally, like my mom used to like send me to school with like oil in my hair. That's like a big thing for the Indian and Sikh community, because like we like to keep our hair really healthy. So like mom would just like make it super oily and shiny and like straight ponytail all the way back. And I wasn't allowed to cut my hair. So I had like this long little ponytail and be walking and be like bouncing left to right. And I just remember like people would like judge me because like I didn't have like my hair down, or I had greasy hair. That was like a huge thing. So people used to bully me for that. But then after something crazy happened, which was 9/11. So after 9/11 hit, that was the first time that I experienced or realized what racism even was at such a young age, was because all of my friends and people that I was going to school with, and like this was elementary school. I think I was in elementary school when it happened, 5th grade. And I just remember everyone telling me, hey, don't talk to her. She's a terrorist and her family's a terrorist. And I'm just so confused because I'm just like trying to figure out what's going on at the same time. This is like the day it happened. And for a while, like I do remember getting bullied for that. And it was like one of the most like prominent experiences. And I think any member of the Sikh community can relate to that. That's an event that changed how the entire world perceived anybody who wears the turban. So unfortunately, like North America, Western culture, anytime they would see a turban, they would associate that to one word, and that word was terrorist. So, and it's unfortunate because there's many people who wear turbans. It's not just the Sikh community. There's a lot of people in the Middle East that also wear turbans. But I do know like anyone in our community who was wearing turbans. So like a lot of men wear turbans in the Sikh faith, and then also some women do as well. So I can't even imagine the level of bullying and harassment that they went. And I've only heard stories from what my families and friends have told me. So I think definitely that was like a huge thing that changed how all Indians, or especially Sikhs, live in the US, because some people were afraid to like lose their lives because there was so much hatred at that time. So that was, one of the experiences of growing up and, being Asian. And yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I feel like we haven't even touched on like being bullied or like just getting harassed just for being an Asian. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like that was like such a prominent thing in my life, like growing up. Like, I got bullied and harassed so much for being Asian, just because I was Asian. Like, people would automatically, assumed that I was like Chinese. People would always like tell me things like, you should go back to China, blah, blah, blah. Like, I felt like it was just because like I was different from everyone else. And I don't even know where that comes from. Like, what little kid sees a minority and they're just like, bro, we don't want you here? Like, who teaches them that? I'm so confused.
That is,
it's all from fear, man.
It comes from the
like
parents.
Yeah.
What, Vanessa? What did you say?
Oh,
where does it come from?
Where does it come from?
I feel like it comes from like sometimes the parents, or like just like their surroundings, because they think like, oh, because you're Asian and like it doesn't matter which Asian, because you're Vietnamese, but then like they assumed you were Chinese. I didn't get bullied as much, but my sister did, and she's Filipino. Obviously she's Filipino because she's my sister, but she definitely looked more Asian. And like there were people who in elementary school literally trying to speak like fake Chinese to her and like make fun of her just because like she was Asian. And it was terrible. She got bullied really bad, and that's not okay. Like I don't know why they like do that to other kids just because they're Asian. It's terrible.
Dude, that's embarrassing. Like, comes from parents, that is literally embarrassing on like white people's parts. Like if your kids are just doing that, like if that's just a learned behavior, that is literally embarrassing.
It's embarrassing, but it's also understandable. Like it comes from fear. You look at the model minority myth, they fear that Asians are going to take their jobs. You look at COVID right now. Yeah, the rising anti-Asian sentiment is off the charts. There is so much violence occurring because people fear. And I think if we're going to be able to address it and try and break it down, we have to try and have a little bit of, I don't want to hold emotional space for their ignorant views, but I also think it's important that we try and understand where those ignorant views stem from if we're able to actually do anything about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just
Both.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you bring up is racial discrimination against the Asian community that has increased over this last year, specifically mainly after the coronavirus was discovered in China. So yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on how to address or maybe even prevent this social stigma that's associated with COVID-19 and Asians.
I just want to say
Yeah,
something
just-
about kind of learned racism, because if you think about it, in the past, at least in the US, and I'm sure this is the case in like a lot of other countries as well for Asian immigrants, in the past like 50 years or so, there were literally like hate crimes going on, and it was really bad, and people wanting to kick Asians out of their town. And it's happened to a lot of immigrant communities, and that is kind of just propagated to now. It's the same stuff that's learned, and that's the reason why you see these kids acting like racist, because they got it from their parents who got it from their parents, and it's just this anti-Asian like sentiment that has been like rooted in at least in the US, but I'm sure that this happens in a lot of other countries as well. So what's happening now with COVID is nothing new. It's just being amplified because, you know, we have a lot of people saying that it's true that while it's true that the virus comes from China, like I think there's a better way of putting it rather than calling it like the Chinese virus, right? Because we don't call all these other viruses that have spread across the world based on where it came from. There's just this easily like, we're so easy to like be picked on, and Asians get so much like microaggressions that we're meant to be submissive and just take it and take the beating. And I feel like that's why people are directing the blame to Asians, no matter like if you're from China or whatever, you're an Asian. Oh, you're the problem. Like get out of this country. So, and to address the problem, I don't know the solution because it's not an easy thing to do. And when it comes to any like issue of racism, there's never a simple solution to any of that. So I think just like making people aware of it is all I can do for now, and making the history like known of what we've gone through in the past and why it's happening now, and understanding it, like Naomi said. So understanding where this roots from and addressing it from there.
I think what you said is really,
Yeah,
oh, you go, Elaine.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to speak on this since I am Chinese. So this has been a pretty personal, I guess, attack on my community. And obviously it's been heartbreaking to see the malice and hatred towards, you know, all these innocent people who have done nothing and are just being attacked due to their ethnicity. And I think it's easy to feel really helpless about this and feel really, you know, unsure of what to do. But what I think is really important is to use the privilege that we do have, or rather the privilege that I have as a light-skinned Asian woman, to educate those in my circles and in my communities and let them know when they're being ignorant or when they're perpetuating these biases that they might have. And I guess especially being Chinese, having benefited from colorism and from this idea of a model minority, it's really opened my eyes to the privilege that I do have and how this is a reality that doesn't just happen, you know, from time to time due to a virus. This is something that happens every single day for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color who are not as light-skinned as I am or experience the benefits of colorism that I do. So I think it's easy to just see this as something to be afraid of or to feel helpless over, but we definitely need to take this as a learning moment to step up and to be as vocal as we can and use what privilege and what, you know, the benefits that we have in order to educate others. So yeah, those are my 2 cents.
That was amazing. I couldn't agree more. What are your thoughts on that, Naomi?
No, I can't top that. I think I was just gonna follow up what Marianne said and just reiterate that, like, I think a lot of my Western friends, like, for example, my mom was just out the other day having coffee with her friend. They had a pet dog, and these kids came up to her and they were like, "Oh, is this your dog?" Then they looked up and saw my Asian mom, and they were like, oh, "Don't eat the dog." And like I talked about this on my social media platform, and I have people who are like, "Oh my God, I'm so shocked that's happening." And I think that's what frustrates me. This isn't new. Y'all shouldn't be shocked. People are racist. They just have a reason to be racist now. Like that anti-Asian sentiment was barely hidden anyway, and now it's just been torn open, and the floodgates are bloody open. But yeah, I think what we're doing right here is a really good start. Actually acknowledging it and having conversations about it, because this is something that I'm confident my mum wouldn't be talking about publicly. There's a lot of shame and stigma associated with it. So I think it's encouraging to see us even having these conversations in the first place, let alone the actions that can follow on from this.
Yeah, and when I think about my experience and what I've seen happening in these and since this last year is, and it was really shocking to me. I was watching the news and I saw, so it was like this Indian news channel. The news is from this agency in India. Somebody in my family was watching it, and they're referring to the coronavirus as the China virus. And they're not saying it as a joke. They were actually referring it to as if that was the real name. So I think once I saw that, it really kind of opened my eyes to, you know what, that it's unfortunate, but there also is this internal racism within the Asian community itself. So, for example, even for like the Sikhs in India, so Sikhs make up about 1% of the population in India. It's a very small group of people. And in 1984, they were massacred, and there was a genocide, which till this day, since 1984, the Indian government has not recognized that. So like just seeing that, and like other instances where like I know for sure there's like a huge difference I've seen between people or Asians who have been born and raised in Asia versus like newly immigrated Asians. So even within that dynamic within like North America, we see them kind of as like, oh, why are they speaking Punjabi? Like, don't they know how to speak English? Even though like you are a first generation or second generation Asian as well. Like I noticed that internal discrimination within the Asian community. So I feel like there's so many layers to that. But the one thing that I do want to highlight is that I'm really grateful to be able to have this space to share all of our thoughts openly in a community where we can, connect and really go back to supporting each other's as Asian women in the STEM community. So, yeah. So speaking about the STEM, go ahead.
Oh, I'd like to add to that, because also speaking of what Elaine was mentioning of the model minority, it is really frustrating that as Asians, we still get discriminated against. The fact that we're lighter skin, it seems like people seem to forget that we are still also people of color, and it's really unfortunate that just because they think that, oh, you guys are Asian, you must be really smart, you must be really good at math, you must not have any problems. And it's not true at all. We do have problems, and that's why I think it's really important, like what you mentioned, Amy, to have this community to talk about like these issues, because it's not something that is new. It's something that's been around, and it's important that we continue to talk about this. So again, thank you for having this panel for all of us to really openly what we've been going through.
Of course, it's so important to talk about this right now and always, and to continue this discussion. So, in the STEM community, being an Asian STEM communicator or influencer, what has your experience been in the tech community? Let's go ahead and go with Marianne.
So it can be really difficult. Earlier this year, I started focusing a lot of my time on science communication videos, and I started growing my following on TikTok a little bit. I would get a lot of nasty comments. Some of the comments I've gotten were, "Oh, you work at NASA, you must scrub toilets there." "Oh, you're an affirmative action parasite." And even, "Oh, you work at NASA, no wonder rockets are exploding." So stuff like that. And it's hard because there aren't a lot of women of color in my field at all. And so when people see me, I guess they don't look at my credentials. They don't look at, my academic background or my accomplishments. They just assume I'm only hired because I'm a minority. And the internet is a dangerous place because people are hiding behind their phones, they're hiding behind their screens, and they'll say anything without a filter. And they'll say stuff that they wouldn't normally say to your face. So it's tough. And getting these comments really took a toll on me. So I stopped making content for a while, and I still haven't gone back to it as of now, so I still struggle with it because I want to put myself out there and I have fun doing it. Like, I like teaching people things about space and science that I'm passionate about, but if I'm gonna get these kind of comments, it's hard. And but I still try to like put myself out there, because growing up I didn't have anyone who looked like me who is in the field that I'm in right now. So if I can just help like one person want to like pursue what I'm doing who comes from a similar background, I feel like just helping that one person is totally worth it, because that's how I feel. And that's why I still kind of try to, talk about what it's like as a woman of color in the STEM field, as an Asian American, because if someone can relate to it, then that makes it all worth it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's a very difficult experience to go through. What about you, Naomi?
Yeah. So I have what do I want to start with this? There's lots of rants I want to incorporate. I guess we'll start with like the first TV show I did. So the first TV show I did was with Discovery Channel. And while I was there, they kept on asking me to keep my eyes open. It was my first time working in television, so I thought that was something that they said to everyone. But then I got another TV show afterwards with ABC, and I mentioned to my like cameraman there, I was like, "Oh, do you want me to keep my eyes open?" And he's like, "What? Why would I want you to do that?" And I was like, "Well, that's what they told me at Discovery Channel. Like, it was always make sure I keep my eyes open." Like, they're like, "Can you say it again? Give me like 10% more energy." And like, so I'm there talking like a lunatic with my eyes like gauging open. And I think it's because I'm Asian, when I smile, my eyes get really cute and adorable. And that just wasn't something that was necessarily palatable to them. But then when I was working at ABC, one of the script writers was saying to me while we went and got coffee, they were like, "Oh, how do you feel about being a diversity hire?"
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, "What? What do you mean?" And they're like, "Oh, we have like diversity quotas. How do you feel about that?" And I was like, "Well, diversity quotas are really good." But I think it was just quite a rude shock that like everyone knew I was just a diversity hire, and they treated me differently because of it. I know I was paid the least out of everyone there, including the people who were running the teleprompter. Yeah, it was just really interesting. My experience there, I was told that I was too young and too girly to be treated like an expert. I don't know why the fuck they hired a 21-year-old girly ass bitch. I don't know what you expected. I am young and girly and I am an expert. Suck it. But back then I didn't have that confidence, and it really, really crushed my ego and crushed me as a person. I even remember I gave a talk I teach at university as well. There were these students who were pitching this product, and I actually said to them that they should get a white man to pitch it because they can be believed as an expert, and not have an Asian woman do it because she wouldn't be believed as an expert. So I internalized those comments that they gave to me. And I think it's only as I started to move online and find more strong Asian women that I was like, yo, this is bullshit. That was horrible. But yeah, it was hard. Like, they made me reshoot all my episodes 3 times. They wanted me to be less happy. They gave me the direction of being monotonous. They were like, imagine someone had hit your car and you got out to yell at them. Imagine you were telling a student off in class. And I was like, okay, 1, I don't tell my students off, and like 2, I can't drive, so I can't relate to this. But yeah, I know those experiences aren't unique. And on both of those television shows, there was one, they ticked the box. I'm their Asian woman, and they had 1 brown man, and everyone else was white. So it's been really interesting. And now I'm at a place where I'm really comfortable yelling and screaming about it and taking up as much space as I goddamn want to. But I also think it's really important that I recognize I'm a very white passing, half Asian woman. And I make it a point that whenever I'm offered an opportunity, I bring up other people with me. So when I'm offered a particular, so there was I probably shouldn't say what it was. There was a particular pitch going forward. This is very vague. And they asked me to be a part of it. And I was recommended by the other person of color that I worked with, and I recommended someone else as well. So it might mean you might miss an opportunity along the way, but you're bringing people up and you're building that community. The last thing I want is to be on another TV show where I'm the only woman of color. Like, it's not what I'm here for. There needs to be more of us, and there needs to be more than just me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. It's crazy, like, how we do internalize some of those things when we're younger, and when we get older, we do question them as we go. So, like, what are some, do you have any unconscious biases against yourself being an Asian woman in the STEM community? Mary?
I don't think it's unconscious bias against myself, but I think, like, being an Asian woman in STEM, like, people assume that, like, because I'm Asian, that I just naturally have it easy. They'll be like, oh, like, you're Asian, like, you're smart, like, you're naturally good at math, like, your parents must be smart, like, your parents must be doctors or lawyers or engineers and blah, 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 blah. But, like, for me, and I know that is, like, stereotypical for the Asian community, but for me, it was, like, so different, right? Like, my parents immigrated to the States, did not know English, worked very low-end jobs, and they did that for, like, at least 5 to 10 years before they could build something from the ground up. And my parents didn't know anything about engineering. My parents didn't know anything about science or technology. So when I was going through my high school and my college journey, I didn't have, like, the parental guidance that, like, a lot of my peers had. A lot of my friends had parents who were already in really good fields, who were giving them some kind of, like, leeway, resources, directions, guidance, mentorship, all of that. And I didn't have that. And so for people to look at me and be like, oh, well, you're Asian, so you must naturally have all of that, and you must naturally be smart, is, like, so stereotypical and wrong, because I didn't. Like, when I was in high school, I started off with healthcare, and then when I started college, I went into business. And it wasn't until I dabbled with a little bit of everything, not everything, but, a few things that I thought I was interested in, when I was like, maybe I should start challenging myself. Maybe I should start researching what all of the opportunities that are out there, and stop excluding myself just because I didn't see anyone else like me or didn't come from a family who did these things. I kind of just opened up my options. And that's when I considered engineering. So for me, it's not a bias against myself. Because as far as, like, in my career, in my profession, as a minority, as an Asian, as a woman, like I feel like those biases are put on me rather than me on myself, just because of, like, my particular upbringing and background, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's the biases that other people have about you, and sometimes they do get internalized, and sometimes, you realize them at a later age, but I think that's good that you haven't internalized any of those things. So I guess let's transition into representation within the STEM community. So how can we increase the Asian representation within the STEM community? Let's start with Elaine.
Yeah, so I do have a bit of a preface that I want to start this question off with, and it's an observation that I feel in every single space that's primarily filled with people of color or women of color. There will always be some question of how do we increase diversity? How do we work on representation? However, in mainly white dominated spaces or panels, you'll rarely hear any discussion at all or any mention of how these people who are traditionally gatekeepers and people who uphold these white spaces can uplift and include others. So I believe that until these discussions move past just people of color, change will be slow and incremental at best. So yeah, that's my preface to the question.
I love us all saying you're on mute to each other while all on mute. It was really good. Amy, you're still on mute. I don't know what you said.
Oh my gosh, when did I mute myself? Literally don't remember, but I was saying thanks for sharing, Elaine. And I was going to go ahead and ask you, Naomi, on how you think we can increase the Asian representation within STEM.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of things. I think it's important to recognize, like, I personally yell and scream a lot about crusty old white men and how much they've ruined my lives. But the crusty old white women are pretty trash too, eh? So obviously when we talk about STEM in this context, we're talking about science, technology, engineering, and maths, but I'm a stem cell researcher. So I go to a stem cell conference and we had a women in STEM luncheon. So like women in stem cell luncheon. Anyway, I go to this conference every year. It's like my favorite thing. They have a women in STEM luncheon. I'm bloody hyped. I sign up to volunteer because, I am here to elevate women's voices. There is a lot of sexual discrimination in science. So I was really excited. I get in. I'm helping people seat. That was like my volunteer thing. And it was a panel of 4 white women from America, hey? 1 white female host with 3 white female panelists. So I think oftentimes when we think about creating more inclusive environments, we get very pigeonholed into our own personal lived experience, and that's all we tend to think about. So I think while we're trying to create more diverse spaces and create more opportunities for us Asian women in STEM, I think we really have to really be mindful about creating space for everyone. Yeah, it's all about creating more inclusive environments, and we have to really think about the intersections of that. It's wonderful that we're having these talks right now about our experiences as women and our experiences as Asian women, but there's tons of things that we won't even get time to touch on in this, such as classism. Yeah, we really have to make sure that we don't get pigeonholed and just put forward people who are similar to ourselves, and we really look beyond that and think about the best ways to remove as many boundaries as possible to bring everyone along.
I think Elaine mentioned a really good thing about that as well. She touched a little bit on that about how it's not just like you said, Naomi, it's not just about us talking about our experiences with other Asian women, but also bringing in the, white people as well to understand, what are the experiences that we've gone through, and so that they can be our allies. Not because I think, Elaine, you did a really good job at explaining it. Do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit more about that?
Sorry, what in particular?
About I remember you were saying how it's important for us to have allies, and it's not necessarily because the Asian Asian people or people of color need help, but it's more to stand by us in solidarity. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that or not.
Yeah, I think as you know, it's hard to get people who have traditionally benefited from this privilege to first admit and realize that they do have this privilege, since it has been so normalized that it's hard to see. So that realization in itself is difficult to get someone to acknowledge. So that's the first step. You know, as someone who, as we need more allies, it's unfortunately the weight is on us to educate people and to very gently guide them to that realization that they do have this privilege so that they're able to use it for the good. For example, especially this year, I've had a lot more conversations with my friends who are white or white passing, and it's been a struggle for them in ways that I didn't foresee, to acknowledge the fact that them not saying anything in itself is harmful to people of color, to not realize that while they sit by and allow others to raise them up just for their proximity to whiteness, just in that action, they're putting down, for lack of a better word, other people of color. So it's really on us to realize that if we're able to educate others, then we definitely should. And it's a process for them as it is for us, as much as it is for us. So yeah, that's kind of what I have to say.
Thanks so much, Elaine. So we've been talking about this, and I think, we could talk about this forever. And I let's go ahead and start wrapping it up. So a lot of the next section that we're going to talk about is reflection. So what is something that you would like people to know about you, or about Asian women, or about being Asian, that often doesn't get talked about? Let's go ahead and start with Elaine.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about how Asians are often called kind of the model minority, but something that's overlooked is the fact that tenacity and determination and work ethic are just things that are so ingrained into our culture that people don't really realize that, or maybe they do, I'm not sure. But people just overlook the fact that Asians are unstoppable in so many ways. We're raised to be, these powerhouses. And while this may be toxic in some ways, it really shows that the way that we're raised, really, we're just a force of nature. And I think as model minorities, the myth of being a model minority really diminishes our power as Asians. But I think it's due time for us to take that power back and really just take up as much space as we can to lift up other people of color as well.
Thanks so much, Elaine. How about you, Vanessa? Is it me, or is Vanessa frozen?
Vanessa has a lag, I
okay,
think.
okay. I think she's also muted. Okay. Oh, well, we can come back to that. So, how about, what are your thoughts on that, Marianne? What are some things that often doesn't get talked about being an Asian woman?
I think that a lot of times, especially in like movies or media, Asian women are seen as submissive and needing rescue. And I think that is an unfortunate misconception. And we also are fetishized a lot. So a lot of like interracial relationships, you might see that it's typically an Asian woman and a white man. So I think that we need to talk about this more openly, because a lot of times people will say that it's just, oh, it's my preference to like Asian women and things like that. But we have to understand, like, why is it that they're fetishizing us, and understand it. So I think that's something that we need to talk about more openly.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you bring up. What about you, Naomi?
Oh no, I shouldn't be allowed to yell. I have too many things I want to get mad about. I'm trying to pinpoint, if we have limited time, I feel like the main thing is that, like, I feel like as Asian women, we're raised to be so considerate about how our actions impact other people that we tend to prioritize the needs of other people. At least that's my own personal lived experience. And I've always been told that one of the most important things in life is to be polite, to be palatable. Fuck being palatable, honestly. Like, done it, tried it, got tired of it. Like, I got called abrasive at a conference, and it was like, honestly, please just go fuck off. Like, I don't have it in me anymore. I did it for enough years. It didn't work. I'm not necessarily sure if this is the correct way, but I think there's something really nice in just not that I want to be like a white man, but like channeling that cis straight white man energy sometimes. Like, if you can get away with it, I can get away with it too.
Thanks for sharing, Naomi. So as we wrap up, what are some challenges and struggles that you face, and what advice would you give to your younger self? Marianne?
I would just tell my younger self to, embrace my culture more and recognize that it's a great and cool thing to come from an immigrant family. And a lot of my issues with my mental health comes from not understanding my identity. So if I could just convince my younger self to, not be people pleaser like Mary said before, and do things for myself and do things because I want to, and embrace who I am and that I am unique, and that's okay.
Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and go with Vanessa.
Can you guys hear me this time? Sorry. I lost signal for a bit. Good?
We can hear
awesome.
you. Yes.
Yes. I definitely agree that it's something when it comes to owning up to my ethnicity and not letting, like, I really love the confidence that, like, all you have, it really, like, builds me up, because honestly, like, for the longest time, I didn't have that confidence. As an Asian, they always think like, oh, you're shy, you're quiet, you are reserved or anything like that. And I completely grew out of that. I used to be shy. I used to be quiet. I used to, like, hold my opinions to myself. And that's what, like, I think a lot of Asians thought that they needed to be. And I think as my American side of me, it's like, no, I will speak up. I will say what's on my mind. And like what Mary said, like, I didn't grow up with engineering parents or parents who are lawyers or anything like that. I know, like, that's like what you see on TV, that like, oh, I mean, some parents were like, oh, you have to be an engineer, you have to be a lawyer or a doctor or something like that. I didn't have that. My parents were neither. They were none of that. So honestly, like, I think a lot of Asians, like, now, I want them to understand, like, it's okay to accept who you are and okay to speak your mind. It's a little difficult sometimes with your parents and your elders of like, okay, like, what can I say? But really, like, own up to who you are and embrace, like, it's okay to want to do something, even if you are Asian, whatever that defines Asians to be. Like, we gotta be strong. And kind of like Marianne mentioned about mental illness, like, it's something that a lot of cultures have a hard time understanding. They think like, oh, that's all fake, that's not real or anything like that. But I personally, my family has dealt with mental illness, and it's something that we have learned to accept. And I still am trying to teach certain family members to accept that this is normal, or not normal, but this is okay to accept that you have depression, you have anxiety, you have bipolar. Like, some things like this is something that we still also need to talk about within our cultures, because it's not really talked about, because they think that as Asians we need to forget about it. That's nothing real. So my thing is talking about being more open to who you are, and it's something that it does take time as an Asian or any person of color, really. So sorry, going off on a tangent a little bit because my computer froze on me.
Honestly, I love that you shared that, because that's really important too. And we definitely have to talk more about the mental health stigma that is within the Asian community. But let's go ahead and go to Naomi.
I think it's beautiful that that's your advice, because my advice to my younger self is to see a goddamn psychologist. Like, I started seeing a psychologist a few years ago, and it has been life-changing. I think particularly as Asian people, I think a lot of we have these incredible immigrant parents who are very strong. They're really resilient, so resilient. We learn so much from them. But I also think a lot of my trauma comes from my upbringing as well. And that's no shade on my family. They're amazing. But I think it's really important to make space for your mental health and to really get someone to give you the tools to be able to work through that. So yeah, more than anything, see a psychologist. And if you're going to see a psychologist, a few quick tips: just understand that it might not be great the first time. Yeah, you got to find someone who's the right fit for you. For me, I was seeing whatever cheap psychologist I could get my hands on, because up until recently, I've been a forever uni student. And you just got to work with the resources you have. But now that I'm a big girl in a full-time job, I made sure I invested a big portion of my money, actually, into seeing an Asian female clinical psychologist. She has a PhD, which is great because a lot of my trauma comes from my PhD as well. And it has been out of this world, talking to an Asian woman who understands my family, who understands my experiences, who is really gentle with the way she talks about my family, because no one can disrespect my mum. I'll beat them. You know what I mean? It's just been really incredible the last year with her, and I have learned so much. So if you have the resources and the time, I would strongly, strongly encourage you to see an Asian female psychologist. If not, seeing anyone is really good anyway, just to help yourself build up the tools to navigate this trash world that we live in.
Yeah, I agree. How about you, Mary?
I think my biggest advice is to not be afraid of being the first. And the first, I feel like, looks so different for all of us as Asian women in STEM. Like, for me, being the first was being an engineer. Like, that was not a norm in my family. In some Asian families, being an engineer, being a doctor, being a lawyer is a norm. And for them, meant to not go to college and not to get a degree and to do something creative or artistic or become an entrepreneur. My thing is, as much as I advocate for women in STEM, I think it's hard to just be the first, to do things outside of the norm, to break the mold. And whatever that means to you, whether it's degreed or not, having a high-end occupation or not, if that's what you want to pursue, do it. I'll advocate for women in engineering all day, but I will also advocate for women who are passionate in any creative fields. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, whatever it is that you want to do, if it looks different for you, if your parents aren't doing it, if your family and your friends aren't doing it, and you're doing it alone, do it anyways. Be the first. It does not matter. Whether you are in STEM or not, be the first. That is my advice.
Yay, thanks so much for sharing, Mary. How about you, Elaine?
Yeah, so obviously I love what Mary just said. I love that so much. What I think I really struggled with, especially, it's something I still struggle with being a student still in university, is just anxiety and self-doubt, especially in terms of my professional career, where I'm going to go with it and things like that. And being in computer science, especially now, there is better gender equity in my department. However, I'm constantly surrounded by very vocal, very intelligent men who are always talking about their accomplishments, and just it's easy to see the disparity in confidence levels between my female friends in computer science versus my male friends. And what I've learned over the years is that if you think you're going to fail, you will fail. And if you think you're going to succeed, you will succeed. So outside of just mental health, we always have to make that decision for ourselves in the end on whether we want to continue on this path. And it's taken me a long time to realize that I'm the only one with control over that decision. And it's given me a lot of power and confidence in myself, knowing that at any moment, if it's too much for me, I can make the decision to leave the field. But it's also my decision, and it's in my own power and my own right to stay and take up space. So I think that's something that I would have loved to know when I was first starting off university.
That was beautiful, Elaine. I couldn't agree more with everything that you guys said today about, your experiences and all the advice you guys gave. For me, it would be literally everything you guys said, word for word, because I didn't because I was bullied, because of mainstream media and the messages that I was getting, I wasn't proud of my background. I used to get so angry at my parents, why did I get born in an Indian household? I'd be so much more cooler if I was white, or and just, I don't know. I think the most important thing that I've learned growing up and now today is to value your unique experiences as first generation or second generation college students, Americans, Canadians. As a person of color, as a minority, your experiences have value, and don't belittle the challenges and the difficulties that you faced in your life based on somebody else's comments. So that would be my advice. So what are the next steps? Let's go ahead and talk about some organizations and some resources where you can help support Asians in STEM. I'm going to go ahead and give this to Mary. Mary's going to talk a little bit about this.
Okay, I'm not a huge reader or anything. I do follow a few accounts on Instagram that I'm a huge fan of, just because I'm such a social media person that the things that really help me the most is just reading short snippets of I don't want to say memes, because they're not memes, but they're just digestible posts. But at Brown Girl Therapy, at Asian American Girl Club, which is the hoodie that I'm wearing, at Asian Girl Boss is a really good podcast just for community support, just tuning in to people who are like us and experience things like us. If you guys like podcasts, what else? I have a website so there's actually so Naomi talked about this earlier about how she started seeing a psychologist. I just started therapy this year, and you guys know how therapy is such a weird mental health in general is just a weird thing in Asian community. I started online therapy this year, and I was so hesitant because the online therapy platform that I decided to do would only do therapists in my local area, and my local area already is not diversified. But I found a website or link that you can plug in your state, and it shows all of the Asian and Pacific Islanders and South Asian American therapist providers in your area. I don't have the link, but Amy, is it possible that you provide the link somewhere, or?
Yeah, we can include it. So there's a link in the YouTube live description box that has a list of the resources. So we'll just add it to that. So it'll upload right away. Everybody will be able to access it.
Okay.
How about you, Naomi?
I'm really proud of you for seeing a therapist, is what I wanted to say. That makes me really happy, and I'm really glad that you're doing it. Oh, we're all so cute. I love this. And while you were talking, there was a podcast that came to mind. So there's Feeling Asian by Young Mayer and Brian Park. It's really fantastic, and I really enjoy listening to it. But it is quite frustrating being an Australian Asian because all I hear about is the Asian American experience, and I think we really need to amplify more Asian voices collectively. One other thing, events like this are so important. This is how you build your community. It's how you don't do things in isolation. You find people with shared lived experiences who are able to support you. So for anyone who's listening or watching, social media is truly one of the best ways to find your support network.
Yeah, it's really crazy, right? Like, especially with COVID, I've made so many more friends online than I've ever made in person. And I'm like, wow, that's so cool. So social media is a huge, very powerful tool right now. So I think that pretty much sums it all up. I think there's also one resource that I do want to mention for Canadians or South Asians in Canada. It's called Sama, and I've also linked that organization in the description box. And they really try to get away from that mental health stigma that, you know, even in the Indian community, a lot of Sikhs face as well. So there's a lot of alcoholism, and people are embarrassed to talk about it, or other mental health. There's a lot of other mental health resources out there. So definitely check that out. And I think that pretty much sums it up. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for watching. And everyone who's watching, you can view the panelist bio in the seminar description and just on the screen. And if you did miss some of the seminar, it is recorded and it's available for everyone to watch on the Engineering Gals YouTube channel. And I think the main thing I wanted to say was to thank you to my amazing Asian sisters for sharing, your truth and everything, opening up and being vulnerable about your experiences. That takes a lot. So thank you guys for joining me today. And I'm just really glad that we did this. So yeah. So I'll see you guys later. Ah! Cutie pie.